go to Krupesh, and we sent him various questions beforehand. I think what we will do, is read out 3 questions at a time.
Okay.
That's what they normally do at hustings, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then
to all candidates.
yes, that's true. And then Krupesh can answer them, and then we'll go to the next person's questions. So the first ones are going to be from me, then from Simon, and then from Elaine, who couldn't come, so Sheila's going to ask those. And then we've got a couple from the FO Friends of the Earth HQ. So my 3 are: what are you and the GLA doing? What else could you be doing to tackle climate change? That's number 1. Number 2, do you have suggestions for what we as a local FOE group could usefully do? And number 3 is, do you have any ideas for us about how to get better engagement with members of the global majority in Brent? We are predominantly white, middle class, middle-aged or plus group. And Krupesh had all these questions from last week.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for setting up the meeting and inviting me to speak to you, because obviously it's a important topic for all of us at City Hall, especially the Mayor of London. Just wanted to, I know when I came in, I think I sort of just explained a bit in terms of the Assembly and our role as well, but our role is twofold, really, because if you look at the responsibilities in terms of decision making and where power and decisions lie within City Hall, the executive powers lie with the Mayor of London. We are there elected as Assembly members to, first of all, raise the issues that are important in our constituencies to the Mayor. For the final decision making is always with the Mayor. So we bring forward issues that are important to, in my case, Brent and Harrow residents to the Mayor, but secondly, to hold the Mayor to account as well. Obviously, I'm on the same political party as the Mayor, so we do that in a constructive way, rather than what you see in maybe Prime Minister's Question Time, where it's a bit more adversarial and a bit more at loggerheads, and compared to maybe what you've seen in the past from Assembly members of other parties, such as we've had Sean Bailey, who's the previous mayoral candidate against Steve Khan, and currently Susan Hall is the Conservative candidate, who's also an Assembly member at City Hall as well. So obviously that impacts the style. It's a lot more constructive. I think a lot more positive in terms of what you can get out of the Mayor as well, because you're obviously on the same side in terms of the issue and argument. And if you look at this Mayor's record on climate change and the green agenda, I think you can see maybe a lot more progress than we've ever seen before under any previous Mayor. I will add a caveat, although I'm a sort of Labour Assembly member, and we saw sort of Boris Johnson's record in government. Actually, I think as the Mayor of London, you probably saw a different individual personality compared to what you saw when he was in government. A very different tangent that the national government has taken on the climate change and green agenda, compared to, I think, what successive mayors in London have taken on this particular issue. So that's the sort of one more, that's sort of the, if I'm trying to make a politically neutral statement, that's probably as best as I can do in terms of London mayoralty. And part of that is actually speaking to the issues that Londoners care about, because across London generally, climate change and if you're looking at what we've seen, particularly around one of the main levers that any mayor of London has around the green agenda, it's transport. So if you look at what we have seen, there's always been a push to increase walking and cycling from successive mayors, and also this. I mean, what you've seen probably more compared to any other mayor previously with the current Mayor Sadiq Khan is the move towards alternatives to vehicle transport. So moving people away from the car, making sure that we have more options for people to use in terms of alternatives to car, especially for shorter journeys or orbital journeys, and then quite drastically cutting down pollution through the ultra low emission zone, which in 2021 was expanded to inner London, so expanded to Brent within the North Circular Road. And this year, after a tough battle, I may say, was expanded to all of London, which I wholly support and see as a way. It's an evidence-based policy, which if you look at the public health data, the advice that was given to the mayor, which I accessed to at the time. I chaired the health committee at City Hall as well, where London public health experts had all verified it had, in terms of the first expansion, also been through peer-reviewed journals about the impact of ULEZ and the impact that it has on air quality, in particular around highly polluted hotspots, particularly the impact on children, just because of, from a practical perspective, you can look at the level in which the emissions from vehicles travel from the car. It's the height of the vehicle is actually quite damaging in terms of height of children, because the pollution within heavy polluted vehicles just goes through to children naturally, just because of that fact of life. So a lot it has been done around transport in particular. What you saw this year, you've seen already this year, it's only January, but you've seen the launch of more Superloop routes, and that's using the bus route outside of centre of London, but looking at the outer London ring and looking at how we can make journeys quicker so that people are more incentivized to use public transport as a result of that. In Brent and Harrow, we've been quite successful in so we have Sudbury Hill and Harrow on the Hill station. Both have been made step-free during my time on the assembly. And we have funding for feasibility studies now at Rayners Lane and at Alperton tube station as well. So making the tube network accessible for people who actually cannot access it or have to make long taxi journeys or bus journeys to go to a station where there is a lift, which obviously does have that sort of add-on effect in terms of emissions, and makes public transport more accessible for those who weren't able to access it before. So the step-free program was frozen completely under the previous mayor and reopened again in 2016 when Sadiq Khan came into the office. And then obviously there's making sure that any new infrastructure that is being built, such as the Elizabeth line, is accessible from day one, and investing in London's transport infrastructure. So there are statistics out there around the Elizabeth line being made by vehicles or other modes of transport. These are journeys that have been made for transport, which then is also being made. It's adding to the case that is being made for more investment in transport, or what we call capital infrastructure in transport in London. Unfortunately, a lot of that relies on the government providing grants to Transport for London and the Mayor of London. At the current time, there's just a very let's say lazy approach from national government on that kind of investment. And I think what I'm trying not to be, I know this is Friends of the Earth and not a party political meeting, but I think
I think we can cover it.
Yeah, just sort of some sort of clarity that brings in a stable government that can provide long-term certainty or funding to TfL is exactly what we need. We're in the 6th year of interim or short-term deals for TfL, which actually just make investment expensive. So the example that I'll give is the lack of clarity over Crossrail 1 and Crossrail 2. So if you're thinking about a production line, when you, and bear in mind the production lines for a lot of the transport infrastructure in London, from buses to trains to railways, happens in other parts of the country as well. So it's boosting the UK economy in that sense as well. Ideally, if you're completing Crossrail 2, which is the Elizabeth Line project, and introducing Crossrail 1, you have the workers ready, you have the manufacturing lines ready, you have people ready just to move from one production line to another. And the rail industry estimates that the additional cost burden of shutting the project down completely and then leaving it for lots of years and then restarting it again is 30%. So it's 30% more expensive to then start it up later, which again, I think if you are minded that you don't want to waste public funds and then to get going, then it is a waste of public money on something that can actually grow the economy and benefit all of the UK. I'll stop there on that particular question because I think that there was a lot to say, but I'll be a bit swift on the others because I recognise I spent a long time on that. But transport is the biggest spend that the mayor has, and it's probably the best way to start off with that particular subject. In terms of other things, so there's planning. The mayor has a grant also around community energy and has provided that to lots of housing developments and social housing developments across London. There's also a lot of work happening with what we call the functional bodies, which is the fire brigade and the police service, and that's just that's twofold really. Could be something as simple as updating their estates, making sure that they're using solar panels where possible. That's something the fire brigade have actually been quite proactive on with some of their buildings, to the vehicle fleet, because well, fire brigade and the police have a large vehicle fleet, and making sure that they are not just ULEZ compliant, but also if you look at the emissions, also zero emissions, moving to electric where stock is being discontinued, and we have on trial at the moment the first ever electric powered fire engine, which I think for years to come, I think that would be a great coup if London the first one to have a successful fleet. Secondly to that, I mentioned that I chaired the health committee last year at City Hall. One of the things that we did do is look at the London ambulance service, because if you look at scrutiny of the ambulance service or where it sits in terms of policy, there's no neat area in terms of local authorities or government that can provide a proper partnership to the ambulance service. So although the mayor and the assembly don't have, let's say, a legal responsibility or statutory function, if you like, with the ambulance service, it is an area where actually as a health committee, from a London-wide perspective, we fed into their strategy, and part of that did have a strong focus on the zero emissions element from their perspective, which I've taken on board in their 3-year strategy, which runs from 2023 to 26. So there are some successes London-wide as a result of that influencing side. In terms of what the local FoE group could do, I mentioned ULEZ earlier, and one of the biggest challenges I think not just I've had, but maybe we've had around ULEZ is, and I say this in particular because I represent 2 boroughs. One where actually I don't think I had much of a problem, only in parts of Brent, if I'm being honest. In most parts of Brent, as I said, the ward that I represented was councillor here was already within the ULEZ zone. It was, people were thinking, what's the fuss about? It's already in place. But when the proposal was made to expand to Harrow in particular, my caseload, or people writing to me, or people who were anxious about it, mainly I think because of how people also played on those fears that people are going to be impacted when they're not. There is something about more that can be done, maybe to show the reasons why, or persuade the public, or work in areas to show actually it is a policy that has a positive impact on emissions. It does have a positive impact on outcomes for particularly children around some of those schools and hotspots. in terms of outcomes, not just in terms of, that stunted lung growth, but also long-term conditions that can be developed as a result of it. And those who have already a health-related or breathing or lung-related complication, the amount of practically years it could save on an individual's life. I think looking.
I think in Brent at one time we were working on clean air, and then there was the clean air for Brent group set up.
Yeah.
So we sort of backed away a bit because we thought, well, they're doing that, and then I think the clean air for Brent group is dissolved from where on it, so it might be something they need to come back into it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've not heard from them for a while, when I did used to hear quite a lot from them before, but
I think they've faded out.
yeah, but I think maybe I understand you have a Brent focus, but maybe more around like I said, I do have this other borough who put a legal challenge in on ULEZ as well, and maybe pairing up with areas that have a bit more difficulty in pushing this agenda might be helpful. So the third thing that you had was about ideas on better engagement with people from a global majority. The way I see it is always about values. So if you speak to communities and you look at, so Brent is if you look at the demographics on census data, on socioeconomic factors, Brent is a borough which disproportionately faith seen as important. So if you look at some of our community groups from ethnic minority communities, churches, mosques, temples are very important places to the large segments of the Black and ethnic minority communities in Brent. And I think it's about the values, because if you look at each and every one of those religions, there is something about helping your neighbor. There is something about helping one another. There is, as I come from a Hindu faith, there is something about the earth as well. In Hinduism, the earth, nature is seen actually as a demigod. So it's seen as a way of, you must respect the earth, which has been given to you by God. And I think if you speak in people's language as such and speak to those values, I think it becomes a lot easier. The one example I'll give is actually is about so in Hinduism, most Hindus that follow sort of the faith strictly are vegetarian. So as much as possible, they will follow a vegetarian diet. Obviously, not everyone does, but they try and do as much as possible. At the very least, those that do eat meat on specific holy days or on specific occasions or events that are seen as a sort of festival period, they will they won't eat meat. But if we speak to those values of sort of non-violence, and there is a link there in terms of how we intersect with some of those values to get more people engaged in this issue. I was the public health lead in Brent for a while when I was a councillor, and the way that we actually did positively tackle the issue was outreaching to those communities and then trying to get champions within those communities who can actually be there, be involved and be engaged, and then take the message back to those particular communities. So that's probably a couple of ways in which I think you could reach out.
Yeah, possibly try harder through the multi-faith room.
Yeah. Who are doing some work on climate, I've seen in Brent. In any case,
Nadia Khanna, I need to get back. We'll try again to contact. Do you know Frank W. Smith?
Yes.
I may have offended him by telling him he had my favourite name in the world, because he was Rabbi Dr. Frank W. Smith. I didn't think you could improve on as a name.
Yeah.
But I'll get back to you.
Sorry, there's couple of people have put their hands up.
Oh, sorry.
Ruth and Suzanne.
Okay, sorry, I hadn't noticed.
No, it's
Was it-
okay now. It was just about the sound.
Oh, yeah, but Ruth, you were asking about Queen's Park Station.
Well, yes, I always ask about Queen's Park Station, which really needs a lift. It's a very busy station, much busier than some of the ones that do have lifts.
Yeah, I can come back to you on that because I am aware of the issues that have been happening there. So this is an absolute nightmare, if I'm being honest, Ruth. So the government, so Queen's Park Station itself is a network rail station. The
Yeah.
government has its step-free national program announced, and I think it might have been in 2019, Ruth. I can't remember when it was now because it was a couple of years ago at least. But they announced that Queen's Park Station would be getting a lift.
Yeah.
It was a public announcement. It's on the record. Last, I'm just trying to think now, but I think it might be 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Department for Transport officials and local MPs were involved as well. And it turns out that announcement was made without ever looking or knowing at what the cost would be. There's just no idea of where or why the announcement happened. And now what Department for Transport are saying is that the cost of putting a lift in would just blow their national budget, if you like, on step-free stations in general. So I don't have a positive answer for you at the moment, but we are hoping, and all your electeds, I know you've got in there that your MPs are involved as well. So all of us from MP, I know the local councillors as well are just putting the pressure, as it's something that they already announced. But that's the best we can do at the moment, and we haven't forgotten about it.
Thank you. We live in hope.
Suzanne? Suzanne is represented
No,
by
hi, not meaning to sort of rub salt in woods. I just want to thank you for the step free in Harrow, because the Harrow Association for the Disabled, this is the double-edged point. It's a thank you and a thank you that we work with special needs people within some schools in Harrow many years ago, and the young girl who I knew very well with her father and mum, they campaigned for years. So to have step free at Harrow is just absolutely amazing. And just, you know, for the people I know alone, and it's a large association for disabled people in Harrow. So I must admit, it was the right. I know how long that campaign has been going, years and years and years and years. I mean, it's been all her life, that campaign, and she's now like 25. I knew her when she was 6. So I really, from the bottom of my heart, you know, I'm so pleased that got done. And also the asthma clinic in the Harrow school that I worked in with all these children, the queue for asthma was massive. And it used the concern, you know, that Harrow should be having a problem with anything that's going to reduce pollution. Just, you know, look at the history of those schools, of where the children were just queuing to be able to breathe their medicines, to be able to get through the rest of the day. The queue just got longer and longer year on year. So just to say thank you for all you're doing there.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. There was one other question which is short, which I forgot to say, which is, do you know when the mayoral and or party manifestos are going to be put together?
Unfortunately, I don't have a date yet. So we know obviously the mayoral manifesto will come out in March, so that's when it will come out. But what I don't have a date for yet is so this is strictly, I think, for those maybe in the Labour Party in terms of the engagement process. So there will be a call out to members to engage in that process. But I don't have the date on when that will be, but I imagine it'll be pretty soon because it's all leading up to March.
Right. Okay, that's good. So Simon.
sorry, and national I can't tell you about because
Oh,
I'm
national.
not privy to that, to be honest. Yeah.
Right, so on the subject of manifestos, what steps can you take to ensure the Labour manifesto includes the maximum possible content on the climate and economic conversion?
I'm not going to give a positive answer on that, to be honest, because so just in terms of where we sit on the GLA, our thoughts and our work is mainly on the London section with the mayor, so we can input and also give mayor suggestions on the London manifesto
Yeah,
that goes to members.
The London manifesto, don't you? Or do you mean the national manifesto?
For the national, I don't have any overarching, let's say, access or powers or avenues to any other CLP or member or members of parliament. What I would say is that I as any member would of a party, we would input into that using our views. My plea, if you like, to the party nationally would be, and I can see one of the struggles that the party is having, obviously, is making sure that there's a positive case in terms of the environment. If you look at what the government is trying to do in terms of the alternative narrative around, just to sort of use as example after the Uxbridge by-election, I would plea to the party not to be scared or shy away from that, and use the whole debate and argument and our policy development in a positive way as well. And I think I saw some of that this weekend when the leader of the Labour Party did say that he wouldn't go back on climate plans or claw back or climb down on the of those plans. But I think the way to do it, and it sort of links to what I said before about speaking people's language, is to use it as a solution to what the country's problems are at the moment. And if you look at the climate energy plan, which the party set out last year, I think it does start to do some of that, but I think it needs to spell it out a bit more. So problem one, the economy completely flatlined, not growing at all. So would it be great if we could develop green infrastructure and provide jobs in this country that develops that infrastructure, even if it is, again, looking at the ULEZ issue, car manufacturing, and bringing up looking at how we are producing and manufacturing those alternatives to diesel and petrol powered vehicles as such. And then that also has an impact on jobs. So that's issue number two. So you've got growing the economy and you've got jobs, which are two issues which I think the party does want to campaign on nationally, because historically they see it as the issue that tends to win any government elections: jobs, economy, growth. And then I would say the third is just how it links to cutting people's bills. So if you look at things like wind power, offshore wind, and how that links into a lot of the issues that people have been faced with the cost of living crisis and what's happened obviously with the Russia-Ukraine situation, which has impacted people's bills here. It needn't have been that bad if we'd invested in proper renewable energy. Yeah, exactly. As former Prime Minister said in the first place. So I think we just need to change the tone of debate and the way that we talk about it, and turn it into something positive. And in a small way, we can try to do that in London. Nowhere near as how things sort of can be changed nationally. But when we look at things like what I mentioned before about how we look at how we invest at public transport, the jobs that it creates elsewhere in the country, but also gets people away from their cars or provides an alternative, which makes it easier for people to go away from their cars in the first place, is sort of the kind of arguments that I want to see us make.
Right. Next question is, to what extent are you and the GLA engaging with Labour's community?
So I mean, I think that's probably the same answer as I gave on the previous question, really. Yes, so from a body perspective, in terms of the GLA, the Mayor, or the Assembly, not significantly, if we're being honest. We would probably, because we are a public body, be engaging more or doing more work in trying to change what the current government is doing, because that's where we have sort of those direct negotiations to try and get funding, to try and get more money for TfL or more money into housing. So that's negotiation at the moment, or those discussions are probably channeled more at the current government at the moment. I think some of that will actually change the closer we get to knowing when in the second part of the year this general election is, and it could have changed actually if we were certain that it would be at the same time, because if you look at it's intertwined with this whole policy and politics and manifesto process. Sadiq's manifesto for London, I think, would have been different if we knew that there's a general election on the same day, because then it's presented to the public as a package, if you like. We'll work with a national Labour government to do this locally in London. So there's just so many unknowns that it changes. It's changed so much every week. And last week, Rishi Sunak's announcement that it's the working assumption is in the second half of the year has now changed our thinking, in that now I think we're at the stage where we just continue with the London manifesto regardless of election and manifesto, which I think is a sort of another way of answering your question before about when Sadiq's manifesto will come out. It's delayed, so I think now we're a bit more clearer in terms of national government. We can start to cement some of that down.
Right, and my final query was, are there areas where the GLA and the Mayor already installed improvements made on time and nature? And if so, what can be done to put this right?
The one that springs to mind is, so the answer is yes, and that's on buses. So on current trajectory, I mean, the Mayor has a target for net zero by 2030. So he stuck to the 2030 target when the government changed theirs to 2050, I think, which is, also on current trajectory, if you look at the bus fleet, it won't reach net zero until 2034. Now, the cost of ensuring it reaches net zero by 2030 is £500 million. So that's sort of a cost, and the reason for that is buses have a lifetime, a renewal timeline, and the ones that are in commission that are due to that are still not with our net zero compliance are due to be out of commission in 2034. So that's the only reason for it. So it will mean, if we are to meet that 2030 target, it will mean getting rid of working buses, if you like. So that's the dilemma. Yeah. Otherwise, I think in general, I'm just trying to think across the board if there are any others. I don't think that. No.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Change happens.
Elaine's not here, so I'm speaking for Elaine, who's leading on a new coalition, the Action for Climate Emergency in Brent, which is bringing together not just us, but other interested parties who are actually in Brent. And you'll have seen what our list of what we're focusing on, what we've done. And particularly it's about accountability, so we can actually see, it's not just strategies, we actually see results of action. So that's really important. And we're asking that Brent prioritise actions, because it's not clear what they're prioritising in the strategy. That it's clear that they prioritise things that reduce emissions most and protect residents of the most vulnerable. and that monitoring should be shared and reported on the key objectives. That has been promised. We haven't yet seen it. A sort of dashboard has been promised. And we suggest and really think it's needed is that there is a scrutiny committee which focuses on the community rather than just the couple we've got at the moment who seem incredibly overwhelmed with the amount of work they've got. We've got an agreement that the idea about, you know, what are the implications for the climate emergency on any paper that comes to the council, any decision making is in there, but most of these seem to be completed by has no impact, not relevant. So that's sort of very much dodged. And we'd really like the public to be involved through a climate emergency with regular reports from meetings, so that there's a real sense of engagement rather than, you know, just a
And the website to be much better.
well, that's another way of engaging with it.
This is probably my ignorance since leaving the council, but there were plans for a climate assembly.
They had one.
They had one.
They had
That's
one.
it.
Okay,
A plan came out of that. That's 2 years ago, 4 years ago. It's more than 2 years ago.
okay, yeah, because so as I'm slightly detached from the council since since I left it, but I think obviously there's a model where they had the assembly there in the first place. So it's obviously there's a recognised way of working. So I think maybe the question is about your ask in terms of the scrutiny of the plans and the Brent Climate Action Plan, because is it something that you want to be done by councillors, in which case, yes, a scrutiny committee is the right function, or is it something where you want the public to be more involved, in which case the assembly type model is a better option, is the way that I would put
I
it.
think it's both. But we want that information, current information, in a form that makes sense to us, so that we can see that the council is where the progress is making and measure it against other councils.
Yeah,
That kind of thing, as well as engaging the public in shaping things.
yeah. So I think
Can I just say, Suzanne, we'll come to you in just a minute.
yeah. So on that, I think the way to approach this, or the lobbying point, would be so the councillors of obviously it's Labour on administration. They do have the LCF, the local campaign forum. I think they had a meeting maybe 2 weeks ago or last week. So that there are avenues to sort of feed into that process to sort of make it borough-wide party policy, but also 2026 manifesto is also another point at which obviously have to be members of the party can feed into that process. The GLA wouldn't have a system, or wouldn't be able to sort of mandate or ask local authorities to take part in that sort of action. One thing I will say from the GLA's perspective, what's been useful for us is around budgeting. So we have last year, and this is the second year we're doing it, taking the Oslo model of what they call climate budgeting, which means that so when you talk about, and I'm saying this because just speaking directly to the point that you made about the equality impact assessment and environmental impact. So every decision goes through that carbon training. So every officer who's involved in, let's say, decision making or developing proposals or policies has gone through a program where also, more importantly, the finance officers, when they're looking at the financial implications, which they must do, it's their job to look at the carbon impact. And the way that they've been trained is to view carbon as currency. So that's the phrase that they're using. So that's equally important when they're making a financial decision. what the impact is on carbon, and then also proactively asking the GLA group, so that's the fire, the police service, all the different components, the London Development Corporation, the Old Oak Common Development Corporation as well, to proactively come forward with proposals that reduce carbon as well, and also applying a fund. So there's a £500 million pot of money that they can use towards that to reduce carbon. So that's the way that we've tackled it at City Hall, if you like. That pot will be open to other public sector bodies in London at first to bid for as well as housing associations. So if they come forward with a project, it's almost like a bond scheme. So there is this is one where it's almost like a borrowing facility where they'll be able to get a better rate than if they went to the bank or even the Public Works Loan Board. And they come to the GLA to say, we've got a project to make our buildings more energy efficient and it will save us this amount of money. So there's a bond scheme, if you like, that they can buy into at City Hall. It has been delayed. It should have come in last year, but the reason it was delayed is because unfortunately Liz Truss crashed the bond market last year. So it is being made available, but we're using the GLA reserve. So there's that £500 million, there's money in the GLA reserve budget to open up to use in the meantime until the bond market gets back to a respectable level, at which point that it's a very convoluted budget way of saying that budget will then replace what's been taken out of the reserve to fill it. So the opportunity is there for actually councils to bid now for some of those projects.
Suzanne and then Gaynor.
Just on the Climate Assembly, we're members of the London National Park City, part of Brent Parks Forum and the National Federation of Parks Forums. Mark Cridge of the...
Sorry, you've muted yourself, Suzanne.
Oh, hello, sorry. Did you get any of that?
Well, up to Mark Crick.
Okay, Mark Cridge. Sorry, I'll try not to lean forwards. It went Mark Cridge, who is part of the London National Park City, who works closely with and in the GLA and the functionality within the GLA. They have been involved in the London assemblies, and Mark Cridge has now got funding. We've had an alert over Christmas or just before to say that he's got funding to start running assemblies with boroughs. So this will have some kind of GLA connection as well. So it's probably worth checking that out, because Brent's model for running an assembly was to pay a company to select people randomly and then run the whole thing, which cost a reasonable amount of money. Mark Cridge is going to be doing this in a cheaper manner, and hopefully with different boroughs, including Brent, with some kind of GLA involvement, no doubt. So I need to really get Mark Cridge to maybe have a word with you.
Yeah, that's fine. I think if I mean, I can look up the details myself. That's not something I have in terms of what National Park City have been funded for.
Yeah.
But it does fit in with generally the GLA approach to funding or working with local areas, because I mean it's difficult in difficult in a democracy where locally they have their parameters. So what the GLA does, it does open up opportunities and pots of money, but the proactiveness has to come to the boroughs to because they're the experts in their own areas, so they have to sort of bid for those opportunities. So if they proactively come forward, then obviously that opportunity is there. That goes for Just looking at sort of your second question about the
Yes,
GLA doing more to back up or coordinate London councils. That's the way that they've always kind of worked, because some councils will be keen to work on some issues, some not, but the GLA doesn't have the power to force a council as well. The best example I can give is probably around transport, where we have something called local implementation plans. So it's lit funding for transport initiatives in local areas. So TfL will set out what its priorities are. So it will be generally, it will be accident reduction, reducing pollution, making junctions safer, and then the boroughs will bid to TfL to say we want to do this, and obviously the boroughs that want to do more in terms of walking and cycling, or values that match up to what TfL want to fund, will get more money to fund those schemes. So it's just a general approach that they do have.
Okay, now I'm aware again, I was waiting. We've got about 35 minutes left for the whole meeting. What I want to suggest is that Gail asks her question and then more questions, but that we stop the interaction with Krupesh at the latest at 22. And then we do a quick canter through the rest of the meeting, because there's lots of things on the agenda that don't have to be decided or mentioned today, but one or two others that do. So is that acceptable to everybody?
Yeah.
Anybody it's not acceptable to? Shout now or forever hold your peace. Okay, right, Gaynor.
It was only coming on your carbon trend, this 500 million. And actually what you're talking about is like the budget for us bidding. Because it seems to me you could feel a borough probably bothered to bid a great disadvantage. Do people generally, do all the boroughs bid? And then the other aspect of it is that it's like all these pockets of money. People in competition for them, which in the end is an overall idea of reducing climate, carbon. The idea of bidding is not great. And the other thing that struck me about that amount of money, it didn't sound a great deal, because do you remember when we were asking Brent how much those property modifications, I don't know whether you know much about this, Krupesh, but they did with some, I'm not kidding you, they did some retrofitting with some then unoccupied, like 3 properties. We couldn't get any detail actually. We got a bit more about what they'd actually done on the rates website. But yeah, they said 3 million. So not 3 million, was it 3 million?
But can't have been 3 million.
Well, it's
Isn't it?
what we did.
It's a million, can't have been a million of properties.
No, maybe it's a million.
It
It was a very large money, so it would be interesting to know what when they did that. I think they didn't tell you actually, but didn't they do something else as well? But I don't know the amount.
What I can do, yeah. So what I can do is I will have details. So the funding is in 3 tranches. So we have what we call, the first tranche was actually maybe a testing phase, where the only people that could bid were people within the GLA group, so police and fire basically. So that's where all the projects went. What has opened up now is scope 2, and that's the bit that's opened it up to the public sector and housing associations as well. So that's scope that's entered. I think just so that you've got a flavour, I think I can sort of provide details of what kind of things are being funded. It is limited, so it won't include things like domestic, for individual homes, because the reason for that is it's essentially a financial scheme. It's a bond scheme, so there needs to be payback. So it is quite limited. It is about finding ways of. The category is if a council has a scheme that it knows in the long run it will save itself money because of the efficiencies as a result of it, and they have no means of funding it, and funding is the upfront capital basically is a stumbling block as to why they can't have a project that will mean that it will have carbon reductions and improve the environment and air quality around as a result of that project, and there's no other way of funding it. It's a particular type of project basically that it's looking out for. So it's not a sort of catch-all and end-all solution, but that is a wider issue I think on heating homes as well. we take that as a separate issue, but quite pertinent, to be honest, given people's bills, as I mentioned before.
So the council wanted to refurbish some properties.
Yeah.
If you look at
Yes.
to demonstrate, they'll be saving.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when we say this payback, so Brent said, well, if we do the city, well, we won't have to spend quite so much on it. You have to pay back.
Yeah.
That's so it's I see. So it's almost like a loan.
Yeah.
It's a loan. Thank you.
Has anybody got any other questions, follow-up questions, comments? Oh, you're still on yours, so.
We had the.
No, well, we have the one
have
from
the final
FOE.
one from
It does,
FOE.
but it sort of covers, it was,
I think you probably know.
what are your climate ambitions for London? What do you think is achievable? And what is a harder goal you're hoping to reach? This comes from FOE HQ. Are the things we can do to support those goals?
Yeah. I mean, there's a general net zero point I made about the mayor hoping to reach net zero in terms of its tower and its institutions by 2030. I think I reserve my political point until now, my overtly political point, because I think 2024 will be an important year. It will be the only year that's had both the general election and the London election. You know, even if it's not at the same time, it will be the same year. And what you're seeing this year, I think, compared to previous elections, is a real contrast around the Sadiq's main opponent's views on this particular issue. Compared to what we've seen in the past, but there's been a general consensus. Sean Daly last time around didn't deviate too much away from yeah, you know, even if you compare it to what Susie Hall's been saying. But we could be faced with a scenario where on May the 3rd, we have no ULEZ on day one is a pledge to switch it off. And the difference I find this time around is there's almost sort of three categories: people who are, you know, believe or validate or accept that there's a climate emergency. Those that are neutral, and if I'm being crude about it, I think not government in general, but the Department for Transport, I would say, is probably in that neutral category, where it doesn't mind if locally you do your own projects, it won't stop or block you. You just won't want anything to do with it, or won't try and intervene or stop you. And then you have climate deniers who want to do the complete opposite. And sadly, I think that the Tory mayoral candidate is in that third category, rather than maybe where a lot of civil servants and some MPs and ministers from our own party are. And I think that just runs a bit more of a risk, I think, compared to previous years in terms of maybe what Brent Friends of the Earth's, let's say, values and objectives are as a and Friends of the Earth national as a sort of wider organisation are.
Greenpeace are trying to run some scheme, aren't they, with sort of like organisations, or at least under Greenpeace's auspices, of knocking on doors and saying vote with the climate in mind. And it's worried me. I mean, the Israel-Gaza stuff is enough to keep you worried anyway on its own. But quite aside from the horrors that it is on its own, it's also put to a lot of people questions about climate change onto even further back in their minds. A lot of people I know who are concerned about climate change, but at the moment are much more wild about Israel-Palestine, which I can understand because it's just horrible. And I just don't know how we manage to keep climate change in people's minds as well.
Any military activity is massive.
Yes,
Anyway.
Yes.
And just regoverning whether it's the Ukraine, which is
Yes.
politically popular, to talk about all the stars and the amount of,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the two is hugely,
Yeah.
hugely.
Yeah. I think from a personal perspective, because as I said, because I represent two boroughs, I've seen I've seen it live in action, if you like, because Susan Hall is a councillor in Harrow. if I look at their policies since they came into office in Harrow, one of the main things that they've done is use their reserves to fund an hour's free parking in car parks. So it's completely going the other way to what we've seen in the past. Sadly, I think even our Labour administration towards the end got a bit scared on issues like low traffic neighbourhoods and cycle lanes, and sort of maybe didn't go on the front foot or weren't confident enough.
In Tower Hamlets, the mayor is reversed.
In Tower Hamlets, yeah, it's an independent mayor, so they've again.
Can I just say that Ruth, who hasn't had a question yet, is waiting, and then I think this will probably be the last question. I'm not sure. Well, Ruth, and then your one thing. Okay, Ruth, and then Gaynor, and then we're going to go to the rest of the agenda. Ruth?
It's not actually a question. It's just that I'm finding it quite difficult to hear what some people are saying. I think they're sitting rather far from the microphone and not speaking towards it. I mean, I hear every word that Krupesh says, but if other people could make sure they're speaking into a mic, it would be helpful.
It's Gaynor that we can't hear.
Yeah.
Ian, do something about that.
Well, if Dana speaks a bit against
Lean forward.
it's
Yeah.
over here.
It's round the corner.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll move next to you then, Ian, which we always have been like.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Hear me now? Can you hear me?
Can hear you
Okay.
now, yeah.
Okay, it's a difficult question, and as Pam pointed out to me, I should have read the notes and sent something in, and I don't really expect an answer. But one of the major sources of carbon is construction and demolition. So we've got the two completely antithetical drives for build. Build would be all right, but we don't seem to refurbish. We knock things down. And I know the GLA have made some efforts because we've got this whole life carbon cycle for buildings, but that's only applicable to the big projects that have to be referable to the mayor anyway. But for me, and it's particularly so in Brent, we have this massive building programme, which isn't unfortunately affordable either, because I mean, I think most of us would not object if we thought it was true social housing. So we've got this huge building programme, and nobody anywhere is counting the carbon cost of that. And we did raise it, didn't we? And we just got blank looks when we had our meeting about it. Okay. So, you know, yes, the mayor wants to build, and we want homes that are, but we're not getting homes that are okay for, and we're also creating enough carbon and enough pollution as well to sort of, in a way, counteract a lot of all the other good things.
Yeah, actually, I will answer that because I mean, I understand what you're saying in terms of the environmental impact of construction. I think the short answer is it is difficult because it's different aims and objectives that you're trying to achieve in terms of like you mentioned. I know you mentioned that it's not really affordable, but from City Hall's perspective, we don't use the government's definition of affordable as well. So if you look at
I know London Affordable and London Living and all the other ones.
Yes.
But when Brent did its poverty commission, they basically said the only rents that are affordable are social formula rents.
Yeah.
And we're not doing them.
But the GLA rate so we only fund homes now that are London's definition of affordable, which is about 60% of market rate, which is far, you know, it's under housing benefit rate, and it goes further than the government's 80% definition.
That's just started. Is that a new fund?
No, it was in the 2021 funding round as well. So if you look at what the GLA funds, it's ditched the as I said, what the national definition is and has its own definition.
Yeah.
So I think that the challenge is obviously making sure that if you look at sort of the land that is there for housing and development, there's little that I think even the council can do if in the overall scheme of development, it's compliant in terms of planning terms, and the land is effectively owned by someone that's not the public sector, it then starts to use what planning legislation it has to look at what conditions it can
But it
impose.
does develop on its own land, doesn't it? That's the
Council,
Yeah.
councils do,
And,
yeah.
and they don't look as much as they could at refurbishment as opposed to demolition. And in fact, if you look at when, even on the major projects, they allow them to separate out the carbon cost of the demolition, so it doesn't come in the overall calculation for the whole life carbon cycle. It seems to be siphoned off. It's just because it's so complicated, it would be really nice if I thought what the GLA are doing. There is a bit on the website, but it's pretty difficult to follow.
Okay.
And it's a huge elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
So it would be interesting to look at it. I did ask Barry, actually, I said, could you explain to me how all this works? He said, no, I'll take it to a researcher in Parliament.
Okay.
And they must have passed out with the excitement because we never managed to get an answer back yet. So that's why, I mean, I just wanted to sort of raise it really,
Yeah.
because also it comes into the pollution side of
Yeah.
construction.
No,
with-
no.
with
So
the children.
he had a new liver. So I bet Sharon owns half the liver. And
No, it's unrelated to that.
unrelated.
What I will, I mean, generally again, I will take that back because I think someone has already looked into it in our assembly
that'd be
team as
brilliant.
well. So I think that has been already. There might be something that's ready made that I can
That
just
would
share
be
with you
great.
straight away.
Yes.
And I say that because so planning and regeneration is not one of the committees I sit on at City Hall, but I know my colleague who chairs it, one of our other Labour Assembly members, it has been raising this as an issue. So it will be the research. I think will already
Yes.
be there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, so thank you very much. for
Very
your
much.
question.
Thank you.
That's it,
Yeah,
Mr. Field.
Ruth had the hand up again.
Oh, Ruth, you've got
Yep.
another question.
This time
Yeah.
it's a real point about
Okay.
this business of pulling down buildings in order to build other ones. The College of North West London, the Willesden site, which is around the corner from where I live, they're apparently planning to pull the whole building down and rebuild it. And it's a very, very new building. And I'm fairly sure that parts of it could be converted directly into flats rather than just, rather than pulling them down and building again. It's just a point on this business of the environmental cost and the carbon cost of completely pulling down and rebuilding instead of using the buildings that are there. I think it's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know, do you have any input in that in any way?
Not so. My understanding is that was owned by the college, and it's been sold. I don't know who to, and whoever it's been sold to is developing that. So not
But
even.
should that come into planning regulations though? Could it? Can it? Does it?
I don't think so, because if someone
So little limitation on planning there, really, is there?
yeah, so I again, I think this is one that if they're changing the use of it, which I think they will be, because from this was something that came up when I was on the council and the college were relocating all their operations to Wembley Park. So I do remember sort of the beginning of why they were making the decision to sell that place, and it was being sold for housing, or was being bought by a developer who was going to develop it into housing. I don't know who's ended up purchasing it, to be honest. But the regulations around what you would need to, in terms of London plan, in terms of housing, and what you need in terms of insulation and structure are very different to, I think, what the college have built. So
That's a pity. I mean, they didn't do the same sort of idiocy to the old school building that is surrounded by Cooper Road, because that was locally listed, so that you had to ask all of us whether we minded.
Ruth, I think it's something we're going to have to come back to another time because it's 9:15.
Locally listed is no longer protected.
Yes, it was, but it's a pity that the college was never locally listed.
Yeah, we've had problems with locally listed now.
So
Yeah.
it's important, but we're not going to talk about it now. I will put it on the agenda for next time. I'll call it rebuilding and refurbishing. And what we could do, and who knows who we should
Especially
approach.
if Krupesh is going to dig out a paper, because it'd be interesting to see what's been looked at GLA level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely something in the latest iteration of the London plan around.
Okay, is that
carbon impact.
good question, Kenya? Is that something you could communicate about and then bring it back to the next meeting?
Well, either way, unless you prefer to, you can send it to me or you can send it to.
I'll
Well,
send
I think you know more about it, so.
No, but
it's probably-
it's better if I send the
Yes,
information
to
and then
you.
you can send it to the whole
Yeah.
network. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said before, if you want to stay, but we know you're a busy man.
Yeah.
So
I'll pick it up. But thank you.
Lovely.
otherwise,
Thank you.
it's
Good to
just
see you.
thank
Okay.
you very
Okay.
much.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Okay.
And hope to see you before long, and
Yeah.
hope to see you keeping your seat and all that sort of thing. I'm sure you will. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay, well, I'm going to suggest